So I want to talk here, because I can, deeper on the concept of why relationships and I guess just interconnection seem harder now. I see a lot of this on social media, and obviously, in terms of what I've seen over my life and what I've seen other people talk about, and just paying attention, I try and do videos that are related to the things that I see and some of the research I've done on the topic, and just go from there. But this particular one I wanted to talk about, I think, upsets a lot of people based on what I can see. So there's an extreme sort of separation now. And again, in terms of numerology, I can explain this. In the past, we were in one. So everything in the last century, in terms of the chronological years, had a one before it. And one is a masculine number. Now, just because I said masculine doesn't mean it's negative straight away. There are good traits and there's some not so great traits about about masculinity. Same thing goes with femininity. But the problem is, in the past, it was kind of unchecked. And so it went to extremes. And one of the major extremes that we saw in the past was that women didn't have the right to choose much of anything. There was this silly concept that because men are physically stronger, typically, they're stronger in all the other ways. Well, that's just not true. If that was the case, there would be no need for feminine, or for women for that matter. It would simply just be men if that's all that was needed. So it proves that both have their part to play. And both can be taken to extremes, and the extremes aren't good. So we're clearly here to keep each other in check. At the best case scenario, we respect this polarity, and we respect each other. But that's not how it's been. Now, I'm not saying that there wouldn't have been, men out there who didn't partake in this. I'm sure there was plenty, but not enough. There were too many rules in place that women had to marry men they didn't want to marry. They had to have children or do whatever it was that the man wanted when they didn't want to do it. Now, that have made things seem more simple on the outside looking in. And I hear this a lot from, I guess, it's those types of men, and then how they raise their sons. And I guess there's a whole group of them getting together. I think there are some outliers who maybe didn't have that upbringing. Maybe, I feel like it's probably a small percentage, but I'd have to look at the statistics to be sure. But it's just my feeling, what I can see. But I think what happens, because there's this now that women have a choice, and a lot of them are not choosing, and I think the situation is, in the past, women wouldn't have chosen that either. They just didn't have a choice. So we didn't really get to see what women were going to be like because they had no choice. So I think that's where we're seeing things. And I think that there's a lot of anger and resentment for modern day men, because in the past, their fathers or grandfathers or whatever were in a position of entitlement. When the reality is, true relationships, true connection, what we truly are underneath this skin are spiritual, energetic beings. And that's not an ideal framework. And again, this isn't something I see talked about as much as I think it should be. But the more we step into that more spiritual, introspective point of view within our minds and our bodies and everything, the more connected we become to ourselves and understand our motivations on a unique individual level, the more authentic we become, the better we are at, I guess, understanding not just ourselves and our challenges and our obstacles, but that of other people also. And that changes the dynamic. So in that regard, now that we've moved into the two, and more specifically 2020s, it's a double two. Now, if we take this situation, you can do that's a master number. Okay, but it's still two twos, which is feminine. If you want to take it and reduce it down, it reduces to 4, right? So you add those two together, it then becomes 4. So, and still at the end of the day, 4 at its base is still a feminine number because it takes two feminine numbers to create it. So in that regard, now we're really feeling the sting. It's come on quite strong because in the last decade, it was 20, excuse me, it was 2001, right? And then there was a whole bunch, after those numbers. But at the end of the day, it was 2 and 1. So we didn't feel it as much back then. Where now, it's double. So we're feeling, that's why I think there's such a strong, I guess people accepting it and moving with it. And then there's a whole bunch that are pushing against it and fighting because it's different to anything we've known. Now, obviously, in the 1, there was 1-2 at one point. But that was long before any of us have been alive because it was many, 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 many years ago. So we wouldn't even have any proper record of it because nobody alive back then could really give a proper accord of it. But anyway, that's why I think it seems more complicated. And I guess in a way it is because half of the relationship structure and relationship responsibility was taken out of the female counterpart of the relationship. Now, this is the part where I think it's really, really sad and quite messed up. When we put gay couples into this equation, that wasn't even allowed back then. That was punishable by death and who knows what else. So we don't even have enough record of gay couples and how that shows up. Again, from what I've seen, I guess because, everyone's unique. We each have when we talk about astrology, we each have our own unique chart, our own unique blueprint. No one person is exactly the same as another. There could be similarities, but they won't be exactly the same. So even if you have 2 men together, they're 2 different men. 2 women together, they're 2 different women. At the end of the day, yes, there could be some similarities in terms of the brain and the brain activity between same-sex couples. But again, we can get more complicated into this as well in terms of trans. There's lots of studies that show the whole idea of them saying they felt like they were born into the wrong body is actually pretty accurate. A lot of times it has been shown when there's been tests done on their brain is more similar to the sex they feel that they are, even if they weren't born that. So again, and this was all stuff that was not okay. This was not allowed. This was not seen as normal or whatever. And it was, again, there were serious punishments and consequences. There still is, unfortunately, some of that. Not as bad as it used to be, but it still has a long way to go. So we can't even really be sure of any of that, can we? That's what's even sadder about this situation. That's only even been remotely accepted until recently. So what we're looking at in terms of the patriarchy, it was really only white males who had the right to choose. But even then, if you think about it, they didn't really either, because their fathers were probably, again, in these arranged marriages and things like this, the father chose who the son was going to marry. And maybe his father before him and his father before him. So in terms of this strict system, it didn't really work for anybody. Not really. Yes, it might have, as a white male, ensured that you had a female body to, make sure that your genes were passed on. Because that's really what a lot of this stuff comes down to. We like to try and pretend and act like we are these highly evolved beings. And look, I think we have the potential to be. Are we up to that potential? Not even close. When you look at the way our society runs, definitely not. So at the end of the day, and look, there's been lots of talk about, in terms of our genetic animal similar counterparts. Initially it was thought it was chimpanzees. Chimpanzees live in a very, very aggressive, male-dominated society. The truth is we're more similar to the bonobo. This is a female female taking care of society. And it's a much kinder, more, I guess, accepting, more fluid system. Would it be perfect? I'm sure not. But it's less violent. And that's what we see. Again, it depends on how we look at this. If we're dealing with women when they're in competition with one another, this is where women become very violent. But if it's the situation where we understand and we work towards our higher vibration, and again, this is where things like astrology are really helpful. This is why I say it's so important. That's why I like to do what I do, and why I like to help as many people as I can. Again, it's very complicated, and I would have to go in really deep to help people. And I'll always work on. I'm trying to sort of work on doing. I don't know, like coaching, like direct one-on-one coaching. That's definitely a possibility, and I'm working towards that. But at the end of the day, it's important to understand this, because we cannot just simply say all men are this way and all women are this way, because we're more complicated than that. We just are. And I think in the past, a lot of our information and frameworks came from religion, which of course was male created and white male created. Once again, it's part of the problem. I'm not saying that it's a problem to be a white male. I'm just saying it's a problem when we only, take the influences or perspectives on one subset of people. That's where things become too extreme. It's a problem. But it's also, the only information available was through your parents or through your teachers or through your pastor or whatever the situation was. It was limited. Now we have an experience of there's more information and constant more information coming out all the time. There's no excuse now not to be looking into these things. And so what we're finding now is we're starting to see how truly complex beings are. And we've only scratched the surface on animals. I think they're just as complex, maybe even more complex in some arenas. Again, it just depends on what we're talking about. But that's the situation. Now that we see the complexity, it starts to show that because we're each unique and we each have our own unique plan or perspective or reason for being here, again, it starts to bring into question, what does each individual person need when it comes to a relationship or relationships in general, not even just romantic ones, all types of interactions and relationships? What is the purpose behind these things? There won't be one individual. I mean, I guess if you want to talk about it from a biological point of view, there could be, obviously, the procreation, the movement forward of your genes, this kind of stuff. But, we're more than that. That is definitely part of what we are, but we haven't explored the non-physical parts of ourselves enough. The electrical being that sits inside of this body. And I think that's important when it comes to sharing a life with someone and planning a relationship or whatever. All of these types of things are important and have to be factored in. Anyway, I can talk about more parts about relationships another time. I try not to make these videos too long because, I guess nowadays people like information to be quick. I'm not necessarily that way. I like to watch long things with long descriptions because I like the complexity. But not everybody's like that. So I thought I would try and just give you some different perspectives to chew on in terms of the possibility about why relationships seemed easier in the past. Even though none of us were there and we don't really know what it was like, we can only speculate. But based on what I've seen, what I've heard, whatever, there were definitely problems. And they were different problems, and in some cases worse problems than what they are now. So a lot of things are coming to light that used to be in the dark. I think relationships used to be a bit more of like a boys' club. You know what I mean? And I don't think that was good for women. I don't think it was good for men either, but definitely not good for women. So anyway, it's good to consider these things and think about the different ways we can go about it and to open the doors into what we're like individually as unique beings and our own unique chart and what we can do with that. Anyway, I'll come back and do another video another time.